Hello, my name is John Combs. I'm a securities entertainment attorney. I've been working with low-budget independent feature film producers and documentary producers for some 30 years or so on securities compliance for their film offerings. So today we're going to talk about the use and misuse of business plans in film finance and show you how that relates to securities compliance or non-compliance. My full bio is at my website, filmfinanceattorney.com, so we won't have to spend time on that here, but you can see it there at my website. I also have my contact information here, so that if you want to make a comment or ask a question, feel free to do so, and let's get into it. Now, we're only focused for this presentation on some narrow legal issues relating to the use of business plans or the misuse of business plans and how that relates to securities compliance. If you want more information about this narrow topic, you can see my books, Business Plans for Filmmakers, published by Southern Illinois University Press, and the other book, Investor Financing of Independent Films, published by Focal Press. Now, let's start with the basics. What is a business plan? And this information comes from the Small Business Administration. So this is their definition. A business plan is a written document that serves as a roadmap for starting, managing, growing a business. I have no problem with that part of it. And it outlines company goals, strategies for achieving them, market analysis, financial forecasts, and operational details. That's fine. We're proceeding okay. Now, the third element of their definition is that it's essential for securing funding. Just depends. We'll talk about that in a minute. And for attracting partners and guiding strategic decisions. So it all depends on whether the business plan is being used for internal or external purposes. Internal purposes, it's used for strategic planning and operations. That's fine. If you have a business and you want to have a business plan so everybody's on the same page and you can see it in black and white. External, it's used for raising money from investors. Now, here is where we start to have a little bit of a misunderstanding and a problem, at least with the definition by the Small Business Administration. Essential for what? For securing funding? Not always. For attracting partners, maybe. That may be the best use of a business plan in terms of raising money. For attracting passive investors, not at all. You should not use a business plan for trying to raise money from passive investors. And so we need to, and every independent filmmaker needs to know this. What is the difference between a passive investor and an active investor? That's critical for your understanding of whether or not you need to deal with securities compliance or not. So here it is, active versus passive investors. Passive investors, pretty easy. They're not active. That's it. Passive investors are not active. And by active, we mean whether or not they're involved in helping make important decisions relating to your film project. Most filmmakers that I know don't want their investors to be involved in helping making important decisions relating to the project, but some do, and some want to avoid what they consider to be difficult securities laws, so they may try to go to the active investor or go the active investor route. But passive investors, not active. So the critical thing for independent producers to know and understand is what is an active investor? What are active investors? So here it is, and this is actually based on case law. And I cite the case law. You can find the citations in my book, Investor Financing of Independent Film. So active investors must have enough knowledge and experience in the relevant field. What's the relevant field here? The film industry, independent film. Okay, so they must have enough knowledge and experience in the film industry to allow them to play a meaningful role in decision making. Again, a lot of filmmakers I know do not want investors to play a meaningful role in decision making, but if you do, it's available. From a legal standpoint, it's available. Now, the second element of the definition of an active investor is they want to participate in decision making. Again, not all active investors that I know about want to participate in decision making. They know there's additional risk and some liability associated with that. The third element of the definition of an active investor is that you want them to participate in decision making. So again, most filmmakers I know don't want their investors involved in making decisions or helping to make decisions with respect to their film. Now, finally, they actually participate. In other words, you can't claim they're active investors if they don't actively participate. That could get you in trouble. That could be a scheme, could be seen as a scheme to evade the application of securities laws, which could be part of a claim of securities fraud. So they need to actually participate. And my advice to you, if you choose to go this route, is to document the participation. In other words, if you send them a decision and say, well, hey, give us your opinion about these three possible directors for our film, and you get their decisions back, you keep all that in a file and back it up. So if somebody claims later, say, hey, this producer claimed I was an active investor and therefore he didn't have to comply with the securities laws, or if he didn't have to comply with the securities laws, but I really wasn't active, and I really don't qualify as an active investor anyway. So they've got to qualify, and then they must want to participate. You must want them to participate, and they must participate. Okay, and you need to protect yourself by documenting their participation. So that's an important bit of information for independent producers to know, and to let them know whether they're selling a security or not. If you're raising money from passive investors, which is fine, then you need to look into securities compliance. If you're raising money from active investors and they truly meet all of these elements of the definition, fine, they're not selling a security. Okay. So, yeah, I've already said this. Why is this distinction important? Well, if you're seeking to raise funds from active investors, you're not selling a security. If you're seeking to raise funds from passive investors, you're not selling you are selling a security. And so you need to take steps to determine what you need to do to comply with securities laws. That's why it's important. Now, here's another bit of information about business plans. A business plan is not an investment vehicle. Investors can invest in or buy shares in a business plan, and so you have to come up with an appropriate investment vehicle. For active investors, on the active investor side, the appropriate vehicles are either general partnership, joint venture, or member-managed LLC. Probably most of you would go for a member-managed LLC. All of the members, the investors in a member-managed LLC, are supposedly actively involved in helping make important decisions. And so that would be a suitable investment vehicle. So you've got to have something for them to sign. A business plan is just a document providing information, and doesn't have a subscription agreement associated with it necessarily, or something to sign. So in the case of active investors, the general partnership agreement would need to be signed by the investors. Joint venture agreement would need to be signed by the investors. Member-managed LLC would have an LLC operating agreement signed by the investors. On the passive investor side, you would either have a limited partnership, a corporation, or a manager-managed LLC. Most likely these days it's going to be a manager-managed LLC. It gives you a little more flexibility, provides limited liability protection that limited partnerships don't. Corporations are too clumsy for something like an independent feature film. A business plan is not an investment vehicle. Now, what's the difference between a business plan and a PPM? Some people get them confused. They're not the same thing, okay? They may have some overlap in the contents. You may have the narrative biographies of key people attached. You may have financial projections. You may have box office comparables. You may have a synopsis of the script. Those are things that are common to both documents. But in a PPM or other securities disclosure document, there are going to be a lot of legal disclosures that actually protect you, the producer, which is part of the purpose of the PPM. There'll be legal disclosures wrapped around film-related contents. And so these are not the same documents. Business plan may be useful if you're seeking a few active investors. And I say a few because if you get too many, that increases the chances that some of them are not going to qualify as active investors. And if you got one passive investor, you sold a security. So business plan is not needed if you're seeking passive investors. In fact, it would be duplicative and a waste of time and paper. So understand the difference between the two documents. Now, this is just an aside. I mentioned financial projections a while ago. encourage you, contrary to what a lot of people in the film industry do, I encourage you not to use the term waterfall or any film jargon when you're trying to communicate with investors who are not part of the film industry. You're not really communicating anything if they don't understand the terms. Okay, and waterfall is one of those terms. It, and so, uh, and technically, it's kind of funny, but you can't have waterfall if there's no water. And often with films, there's no revenue to report, as you know. And thus the term waterfall is inherently misleading and maybe this is a stretch, it may get you in trouble as part of a claim of securities fraud. You're misleading investors about something important. So I would say stay away from the term waterfall. If you're talking to your film industry friends, fine. You want to look like you know what industry jargon is good, fine, use waterfall. But if you're talking to investors, use the term financial projection. So I think the preferable term is to use what your 8th grade English teacher taught you as a more concrete term, financial projections. And I have a video on financial projections as part of this series that I'm doing for YouTube. So check my YouTube channel and check out the video on financial projections. Now, back to what we were talking about, the active and passive distinction and so forth, and the use of business plans. If you're selling a security, you've got passive investors, and you're pretending you're not, you're claiming you've got active investors, you've probably made no effort to comply with securities laws. So that could be a problem. I've got another video on the consequences of noncompliance or failure to comply. I think the title of it is. So that tells you what could happen if you do not comply with securities laws. If a single investor in your offering, and I mentioned this a moment ago, is active, but you're claiming they're active, but they're not really, you may be selling a security. So, you need to comply with securities laws. Also, common law fraud exists outside of securities fraud. Common law fraud may still apply even if securities fraud does not. So as you're writing your business plan, if you're not using an attorney to help you or somebody who's knowledgeable about these things, filmmakers, in my experience, tend to exaggerate. You use flowery language and so forth, and because they're positive, they're promoting their film project, and that sometimes can be misleading, and so you can commit common law fraud by misleading somebody, a possible investor, about something important. So you want to be careful with the language that you use. Now, this is what we covered today. We defined the business plan, at least the Small Business Administration did, and we disagreed a little bit with some of that definition. It's not essential to raise money from passive investors. We talked about the distinction between the uses of internal versus external business plans, so we kind of understand the difference. And we talked about when a business plan is essential and are appropriate to use. And it's very narrow. It's very limited. There are people running around in this industry, have been for 30 years, as long as I've been involved, pretending to be financial consultants or business plan consultants, and who don't know a thing about securities laws, and ignore all of that and ignore this distinction between active and passive investors, and they can get you in trouble. Now, I'll tell you a story. I had a lady sitting in my office one day who had paid a business plan consultant about $5,000 to prepare a business plan, and she found out later that she was selling a security because she's trying to raise money from passive investors. She wasn't trying to raise money from active investors. And whoever the business plan consultant was didn't either know about that distinction or didn't advise her. And she found it out from somebody else later that she was trying to raise money selling a security. And so she had wasted her $5,000. And apparently that was all the money she had. And she was sitting there in my office crying because she had no money to pay a securities attorney with bona fide expertise in securities compliance to help prepare a PPM for her use in raising money. And of course, there was nothing I could do. What I encourage filmmakers to do in that case is not look to the attorney to help finance their offering at whatever level, but to use Kickstarter or one of these donation crowdfunding platforms to get startup funds, or to borrow startup funds, or to have someone gift them startup funds. Those are better alternatives. But in any case, she was at wit's end and sitting there crying, and it was kind of a sad thing. And it made me angry about business plan consultants who are misleading some of these filmmakers, and that's been going on for 30 years. So we talked about the all-important distinction between active and passive investors. It's really important that independent producers understand what an active investor is and how that relates to passive investors. And we made the point that business plans are not investment vehicles, that there are differences between business plans and PPMs and other securities disclosure documents, and that serious consequences may result from the wrongful use of business plans. Okay. Now, other topics in the series, a couple of I mentioned in this presentation. What is a security? I go into a little more detail there. Securities compliance, some of the things you have to do to comply with securities laws. Disclosure controversy. There's a big disclosure controversy in the industry. Some people say it's better not to have any disclosure or minimal disclosure. I'm of the school that you're safer, you're better protected as a producer from a disgruntled investor if you provide full disclosure and fair disclosure. Then I have a video on failure to comply. What are the possible consequences if you foul this up? And then another important topic is finder's fees. A lot of independent producers don't know what the rules are with respect to finder's fees and whether they can be paid or not. And then we talked about earlier about financial projections, and I got a whole video on financial projections based on the SEC's they have a policy with respect to financial projections. So you ought to be aware of that if you're raising money from passive investors, which most independent producers do. If they're raising money for a low budget film from investors, they're probably selling a security because they're raising money from passive investors. And that's it. That was one of my favorite topics, I guess. So check out those other videos, and I'm not sure, this may be the last one I do. I've got one other idea about a video that I could do that might be helpful, but we'll see. So